Hi there! I'm Mike McArthur from the Oshkosh Public Library, and welcome to some more Librarian Learns. The topic today is the Grand. Back up, little personal history about myself. I did not move to Oshkosh until 2012, so I only know the Grand as this beautiful restored opera house. And I just assumed it had always been like that. Nothing could have been further from the truth. So today we're going to take a look at probably its lowest point. The concept of the Grand began in 1882 with a group of local businessmen who wanted to create a modern opera house in Oshkosh. They hired architect William Waters to do the design. The Grand opened its doors on August 9th, 1883 with a performance of The Bohemian Girl by the C.D. Hess Opera Company. The Grand at this time, at the late 19th century, early 20th century, really was a destination for performers from all over the country. The Grand really had no problem drawing in the best talent from the stage, Broadway musicals, and in the 20s vaudeville. This really started to change, and the Grand started to struggle during the rise of the motion picture. In 1948, the Grand was extensively remodeled and reopened as the Civic Theater, a more modern motion picture house that would show second-run movies and host occasional community events. It was at this time that the biggest changes to the Grand, both interior and exterior, were made. From the outside, basically all the windows and the original front entrance were all bricked up. With the original entrance bricked up entirely, they installed a more modern ticket booth and entrance on the corner, kind of facing Market Street. By the 1960s, the Grand was in pretty rough shape. If you look at pictures from the time, you could clearly see the building physically crumbling and deteriorating. It had leaks. It was cold. I was told there were bats living in it at one point. The first significant push to restore and save the Grand came in 1965. A group of citizens got together and created the Grand Opera House Committee. What they really tried to do at this point was bring awareness to the historic nature of the Grand and the plight in its current condition. The committee was never quite able to raise the funds to purchase and restore the Grand. So the deterioration continued. By the 1970s, the Grand entered basically its lowest point. The 1970s seemed pretty rough on Oshkosh as a city as a whole. During this period, the city lost nearly 3,500 people. That's about 7% of its population, according to the census. The city in general had not such a great reputation in the 70s, with incidents like the 1974 St. Patrick's Day student riot that happened down near the university, making national news. Even Johnny Carson was cracking jokes about Oshkosh at this time. Starting in the late 60s and definitely taking off in the early 70s, there was a proliferation of adult entertainment in the city. X-rated theaters, massage parlors, go-go dancing, nude dancing, adult bookstores, all of these were popping up all over Oshkosh, and it kind of threw the city into this somewhat moral tizzy. So you add that with the city's already robust and popular bar and tavern scene, and it gave the impression Oshkosh was becoming some kind of a new Sin City. The Grand was in the middle of all of this. So the Grand Theater started showing adult films somewhere around 1971, and though it was not the only movie theater in town showing X-rated fare, the Time Theater and the 44 Outdoor both showed adult movies. However, they did so far more sporadically, whereas the Grand pretty much became a full-time adult theater. It wasn't just the fact that adult films were being shown, it was really the fact that adult films were primarily being shown in the Grand, which should have been a jewel of the city, this national landmark. The best thing it can do now is show porno. That it really rubbed people the wrong way. In 1974, it gained the distinction, or maybe infamy, of probably being the only adult theater to be added to the National Register of Historic Places. So, in 1975, the theater was purchased by two men from Rockford, Illinois. Their sales pitch to the community was, hey, we're doing this, but we're going to raise money and restore it back to its historic brilliance by the 1976 National Bicentennial. That really didn't end up happening. Instead, my impression was that they never really had the finances to restore the building. They depended on donations and community support, that they would come in here and work for free and help restore the building as an act of basically community service. However, understandably, people really didn't want to do that when the theater was still showing X-rated films. They also bumped up against City Hall for code violations during their construction. They actively feuded again with City Hall and the city manager. City manager Gordon Yeager claimed that the owners were using the people and the news media in an attempt to restore the theater so they could just continue to show X-rated films. The dirty movies finally disappeared in 1978, but with them went the hope that the current owners were ever going to be able to raise enough money to restore the Grand. However, there was an upside to all this controversy at the Grand in that it brought a lot of public attention to it. And in 1979, the Grand Opera House Restoration Committee began lobbying for a citywide referendum to have the city purchase, operate, and restore the Grand. This was something of a contentious issue, and might so still be today, that there's certainly lots of people who feel like it's not the city's place to purchase buildings for restoration and to operate. Like this is something that the city really shouldn't be involved in. Others kind of felt that the Grand was too far gone and should just be torn down, and the city should use their money to work on, newer ventures rather than trying to save a crumbling opera house. So, on November 4th of 1980, the referendum went to the people of Oshkosh, and by a 2-1 margin, voted to approve the purchase and restoration and operation of the Grand by the city. Yay! 6 years and about $3.5 million later, the Grand reopened, and on October 3rd, 1986, the Grand Opera House opened its doors with the performance of The Bohemian Girl, the same way it did just about a century before. Of course, nothing gets saved and lives happily ever after. You never really are finished saving a historic building. In 2009, yet another Save the Grand push had to be conducted when major structural issues were discovered with the Grand's roof. And just like in 1980, there were plenty who were wondering why the city should be spending money on this. After a tremendous swell of community support, the city council unanimously voted to approve the funds to make the repairs on the Grand. If you're playing the how many times did Michael say the Grand drinking game, you should probably call a paramedic right about now. So here I am on the corner again, talking about the Grand, which if you look at it today, it looks fantastic, honestly. Very idyllic. And say it is once again, the kind of jewel of the city as the original builders hoped it would be back in the 1880s. Yeah, so I think about the Grand, what it is today, and it's hard to imagine that, the type of place that showed adult films in the 70s, and at one point had a guy bring his shotgun and dog to the theater and shoot up the screen. Hilarious. I mean, dangerous and scary, but hilarious kinda, right? In hindsight. It's come a long way, and it's pretty cool that the city continues to maintain it and that the community continues to support it. So hey, I learned something. If you like videos like this, let me know in the comments below or contact me using the links in the description. And with that, I'll see you later.